All right. Homework assignment. Let's go back to this page. So I'm going to show you where this big document is, 107 pages of all the form types. There is a, let me scroll back to the top so you can see where I'm at. There's several places you can click on it. One is right here. It says form zones and building form types. If you click on that, it will download or open in your browser this option. And I'm going to have to minimize my browser for a second there because I couldn't see it. All right. When you do so, you will get this big document. Let me show you how to navigate this document. I had mentioned earlier that I live in Peripheral. And what I want to do is show you the way this document is set up and then get to Peripheral, and then we have another poll question to kind of keep it interesting. So the building form zones, this is an introduction and covers some of that history that I just mentioned. It also talks about if you wanted to build a new property, like Tom Schweiss did the research on 5th and Arapahoe, what would you have to do to redevelop those two properties? You'd have to find out which building form zone you're in. And I don't know offhand if that's transition or edge, but maybe Tom could put that in the chat and we can find out. Then you would find out which building forms are permitted. Then you'd read the rules of measurement. And you basically would dive into deeper and deeper detail. So I'm going to do that for Peripheral because there's a question I have associated with it.
Tom, has that properties in core?
It's in core? Okay. Yeah, I guess 5th is fairly far south relatively, so it's core. All right. Out of the diagnostic report, 9 different zones came into place. You saw in our survey that most people in this call are not in any of these zones. They were in PUD. And then I think next was Peripheral. But in any case, people live in, could live in all of these zones. And where do they mostly exist? From the map, we saw this was downtown, around downtown. Outer edge is next to Colorado School of Mines. Peripheral is outside of that. And that's much of the central neighborhoods. Neighborhood corridor is sort of Ford and Jackson area. Main Street A and B are mainly downtown. And then Strip is South Golden Road. So those are the kind of the main different parts of the town. So for the core, if you lived in the core, they would go through a description of it in italics that matters to them. And then in non-italics, they're showing you these are the types of houses that are allowed in the core. What's a 3-cottage compound versus a cluster? I've got that on my slides here. Let me go to that. So a compound refers to a group of buildings located on a single ownership lot where multiple small accessory dwelling units, for example, ADUs, are permitted instead of one large building. A cluster refers to a group of buildings, each located on its own lot, sharing amenities such as a common court and parking facilities that are located on a tract and managed by an HOA or a homeowners association. What is a common court? A common court is a shared amenity owned and managed by the HOA with a standard common court ingress and egress easement. So what's the difference? A compound is sort of like a single family ownership. You could think of it that way, where a family decides to have grandmother live there and maybe a 3rd generation, and they all, it's just their family compound. Whereas a cluster, somebody could literally split their lot, and this is a big change. They could split their lot and allow much, much smaller dwellings on a smaller footprint to exist with private independent ownership. They might be in an HOA if there's common land, but in any case, it's a very different model than exists today. But it's worth pointing out, it is what existed when Golden was being formed, and people like those parts of town that are kind of jinky and small and, kind of interesting. It's going to allow the recreation of that, which our current zoning doesn't allow. So cluster, you could break it up. Compound, you can't really break it up. That's the big difference there. And what's the rest of this document about? All sorts of things. Transition areas, those are just outside the core. Edges, slightly further out. This one jumped out at me. At the edge of Washington and Iowa, this was recently put up, and people might say, you know what, I didn't like it before. I don't really want to allow it in the future. You could weigh in and say so. This form type is, maybe not appropriate for the edge community there, or maybe you don't even think they've overlaid the right form type. That's a way you could weigh in. You could look at what they're proposing and say whether you like it or not. And by the way, saying you like something is also a really important thing at this stage. So I'm going to just keep going to peripheral because I do have a question built up. Outer edge, boy, just a ton of stuff. Big apartment buildings, clusters of cottages. Do you live in outer edge? Possibly if you live near Colorado School of Mines. This list here is pretty long and extensive, and everything adjacent to Colorado School of Mines is dictated by this list, and they're saying, yep, all those things make sense. And I would have thought, really, does that make sense? But I just walked by a huge apartment building, in my mind, on 13th, just down from Colorado School of Mines, and you know what? It fits in because it's been there forever, and I never noticed it. Peripheral. I've scrolled down to page 23 of 107 now. And on the left, you see a suburban house. Those are allowed in peripheral, but an urban house was not allowed. What's the difference? These are typically lot line to lot line, not as much open space. Let me make it a little bigger. So with a suburban home, you have more of a setback. It's more sidewalk, maybe a driveway with parking in a garage. Here's parking in a garage on the side. Whereas the urban home, on-street parking typically, and that this is a porch, not a parking area, denser, lot line to lot line, it feels more urban. I mean, you've been around the world, Bill, so you know that urban homes look different than suburban homes. And so what we're saying is, let's not have any of this in our current peripheral areas. They would be out of place.
Yes.
Okay. Cottages, how do those compare? Again, cottage in a suburban peripheral area, maybe parking in the rear in a separate garage on the left-hand side. Other options, a side drive cottage where you're on a corner lot and maybe you have access from a different street, or if you're not on a corner lot, you literally have a driveway between yours and the adjacent properties. And so back to that Fifth and Arapahoe example where there was two properties that already exist, but maybe somebody wants to do a tear down and rebuild. This would be an available option for them, a side drive cottage. It would maybe be bigger than it exists, but still fits in. Whereas a compact urban cottage, it's no off-street parking and just a little denser. Compounds, I don't know if your eyes are not glazing over, then you're not paying attention. I don't know. There's just so much going on here that if you're wondering, okay, now where do I weigh in? You lost me. First of all, I apologize. That wasn't my intent. But there is a lot in here. And my main concern is that people will gloss over things. They will kind of glaze over and they won't weigh in where they want to. So let me give you an example of something that I just weighed in on the other day in a minute. Duplexes, you can see that a village duplex is not as bulky as an urban duplex. Look at this urban duplex and how much of the footprint of the ground it covers. This is something I really want the people who are in Keep Golden Golden look a little deeper into. If you didn't like this, and it's still allowed in your neighborhood, just tell them to grandfather it in and don't allow it again. Like that would be a way to weigh in if you don't like urban duplex in your neighborhood. Whereas a village duplex, not so bad, right? And where you would dive into that detail, let's go dive into the detail between, for example, a cottage and a suburban house. So where would we do that? We would continue to scroll down past all of this stuff, and then they would go into the building forms and details, clusters, form types, building types, massing, all this stuff that you get to weigh in on if you are into it. Or maybe you just kind of skate across. So suburban home, minimum lot size is still listed as 7,000 square feet, the minimum frontage, 50 feet. Here is a suburban house on a corner with back garage. It took me a minute to realize that this is a car. This little triangle is a car. Here's a front access garage, top view. And here's that sort of schematic, that kind of pop-up picture of the same property. So 7,000 square feet. And all the details there, the setbacks, how big a footprint, details on how many pitches there can be and what those look like. And I'm gonna jump down to cottage just because that number of 7,000's in our head. And you can see, yes, they have smaller footprints. And the basic cottage, minimum lot size 3,200, street frontage 32. And the idea is there's still just a little bit of green space, but it's cute. It's a little cottage and doesn't have as many square feet minimum. I scrolled very quickly past the maximum floor area, but you can only build so big as well. That's another limitation that the current code didn't have. And so all the way back to Bill's original question, how is this different? How is this going to do better? Maximum floor area was not defined. What was defined was minimum open space, like 40%, but people would just max out the square feet. Now the square feet themselves are maxed out. And if it's 2 stories, well, that's only 1,200 on each level. So let me go back to this little 6-step thing here. I've looked at, we just went through 9 neighborhoods and who knows, 20 plus form types. And that's not the way a person's going to engage with the code, because what they're going to do is they're first going to find out what form zone they're in. So if you're in peripheral, you only have 9 form types to choose from. Whew, that just cut down a lot of work. I'm over here on this top right. Then you're going to find out, you're going to read the rules of measurement and say, okay, how big is my lot? And then how much stuff could I build there? And that will narrow the number of form types. Then you'll read the introduction and try to figure out whether it's in character with your neighborhood and it's going to work out. And finally, you'll dive into this detail here. I don't know how you would do it today. I think that it wouldn't be, I don't know that it's any easier, but I also wouldn't want to say it's any harder, because once you get used to this idea that your form zone defines the form types and then your form types are dictated by the size, I think it narrows pretty quickly to something that is less overwhelming. And that's kind of why I wanted people to find where they live and perhaps even what form type they have and whether, they want to keep it going, then weigh in on that.